R-37F-235, interview with Commander McCain.
Okay, Commander.
Yes.
What were your feelings when you first stepped through that door?
One of emotion, in that I was glad I was not asked to speak, and I was very impressed by the way Colonel Flynn was able to say what, in words, we all felt in a very outstanding manner. I thought he gave an extremely fine speech, and his remarks were to the point and extremely well put. But my own emotions were very strong, especially seeing Admiral Guyler, who I had not seen in a long time, and all the people there shouting very loudly. It was quite an emotional experience. It was a long walk to the bus.
You mentioned earlier that you were surprised at the size of the crowd.
Yes, I was, and especially the younger children. As you know, we've been hearing from the communists all the things about how terrible that America's younger people are now, and it was very refreshing to see that there are quite a few that are still extremely patriotic. It seemed, at least to me, that they were. I think that their welcome was very genuine.
That's an interesting point that you just alluded to. You said that the communists were telling you that America's young people were...
What I mean by that is any adverse thing, anything that's detrimental to the United States that is written will, the Vietnamese, if they get a hold of it, they would try and channel it into our hands. For example, I did not find out about the moonshot until a year and a half afterwards, but if there was an earthquake, we would usually hear it, or a flood, or a hurricane, we would hear about it within a couple of days. So that's what I mean by most of any adverse comments, or particularly by Americans, would be given to us.
I see. Okay, from the airplane you went by bus to the hospital. How's your treatment been here, and what are your impressions of it?
Well, my treatment, I think, has been outstanding. Everyone's been very friendly. The food is outstanding. I'd always heard the hospital food was terrible. In fact, I believed it from being in the hospital a couple of times myself, but that is not true here. The food is very good. The doctors have been going out of their way, especially men like in the dental department. They're doing work on my tooth, like on people's teeth, that would take many days. They're doing in a very rapid time, and it seems that they're all working overtime and doing a very fine job. It's very impressive.
Good. Commander, was your treatment in Hanoi any different because your name was McCain?
I would have to say yes, that it was.
Okay, Commander McCain, I wonder if you'd be good enough to describe to me some of the events that transpired from the time that you knew you were going to be released until you actually arrived here at Clark.
Well, as to the time we knew that we were going to be released is a little difficult to state, because the Vietnamese did not tell us actually that we were going to be released until approximately 24 hours before we actually got on the buses. But there was very little doubt in our minds that, at least we hoped, that it was in the offing. We had been told that the agreements had been signed on the 29th of January. We'd been called out in the center of the yard of our camp that we had recently been moved to about 3 days before, and read to by the camp commander the provisions of the agreement as was stipulated by the agreements, that all POWs would be informed. But I would have to ask you exactly where you want me to start on that.
Well, I think the point in time that I'm interested in is that last 24 hours.
Last
that you
24
spent
hours.
when you were...
Obviously, I just wasted a lot of film.
No, that's...
The last 24 hours, the day before we left, we had been told one thing about the Vietnamese guards is they have a very difficult time keeping anything to themselves, because they're rather childlike, and we were kept pretty well up to date by the English-speaking guards. They would take a certain pleasure in telling certain the POWs what was transpiring from time to time, and we had been told by some of the guards of the date that we were leaving. They had received the word but had not actually told us. But in the 24 hours before, we were, during the day, we went out and made sure that our clothes all fitted us. whether they happened to fit or not. We made sure that they either fitted or didn't fit us, that they had provided. And also during that day, late that afternoon, we were given a Vietnamese meal of sorts, a pretty good meal. It was rather amusing to us, of course, because it was done in the typical communist style. For approximately 10 days before that, the chow had been lousy, because they've been saving all the money to give us this one good meal the night before we left. And it had been pointed out to them, however, that we knew exactly what they were doing. However, that did not dissuade them from that. That afternoon before, I guess about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we got some of these things that are sort of like a Chinese egg roll, and some pork. It was sort of barbecued pork fat, and some Vietnamese wine, which is, I guess is what you'd call it. It's sort of like a sweet rot gut brandy is about what I would describe it. It doesn't taste too bad if you haven't been drinking anything else. But, and we got about 2 or 3 ounces, I guess, of that per man. And, we drank that down, and then that evening before, as was different, instead we used to usually go back into our rooms about, I think about 4, and we stayed out of our rooms until about 7:30. This was also not too big a deal because we had just received books in the Red Cross packages for the first time, and everybody was busily catching up on a few years of reading back books that we hadn't read. Then that evening, they also opened the shutters of our windows, which were barred, but opened the shutters, which was another magnanimous gesture on their part. And also the day before, of minor interest, I was called over to meet with the camp commander and an English-speaking, fairly high-ranking officer, and they, as did a couple of other people who were of propaganda interest to them. And I was asked if I would like to thank the doctor who had operated on me some 5.5 years before. I thought that was a little amusing too, since that they said that he was very concerned about me, and I was curious about his concern for the previous 5 years since I had not seen him. But however, he was very concerned on the day before I left. I of course mentioned that I did not know the doctor enough to say anything to him, and it was something of a feeble propaganda attempt. If I had, for some strange reason, been agreeable to them, perhaps they would have asked me to write something or something like that, although it was certainly a very friendly type quiz. It was nothing, any kind of a pressure or anything like that. Yeah. There was a few others also of their interests that were called over. Let's see, the meal, staying out that night, and that was about all. Most of us had a little trouble sleeping, but other than that, it wasn't any different.
Picture yourself for a moment, coming on the bus to the flight line at Chi Lam, and could you tell me a little bit about what your feelings were and what your thoughts were from the time you started getting off the bus and going through the reception line and then finally headed for that 141 sitting on the line?
Well, frankly, Ken, the primary thought that I had was that so many times I had thought that maybe that would never happen because we had had our ups and downs, as you know, from the time of 1968 when the bombing was halted. Almost all of us were pretty sure that it wouldn't be long then before we were going home. But it was certainly a great deal of joy. Being in the Navy, I was very pleased to spot an officer who was the captain out there, Captain Griffiths, who was a senior Navy man. I recognized his white uniform. I was very pleased to see that. And I don't think that any of us were so carried away that we didn't notice the surroundings. It's a lousy airport, and the airplanes looked beautiful. Everything it was quite an emotional experience, I think, but not overwhelming. I think our arrival at Clark was much more of a feeling of emotion than that of our departure. I think the primary emotion might have been I'd like to get on the plane as quickly as I can so that before the Vietnamese throw in something else into the game.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of the guys mention their reaction to the press at Chi Lam. Did that affect you in any way, or did you have any feelings about that
No,
at that time?
I got a little tense because I was the head of the line. They were taking us by shoot down, and I was the first guy off that bus. And we were standing there, and it was obvious that the gooks were having us stand there just so that to make sure that everybody got enough pictures, you know. And they came pretty close, but I didn't really care. I was mainly concerned with maintaining a straight face and not looking at them or looking around. It was a minor aggravation. I was somewhat amused to see two of our old interrogators were doing the were sitting on the table. There was one of them who was particularly hated by most of us, one called the Rabbit, who was an extremely unpleasant character. was sitting there. I was kind of surprised that the Gook should have him sitting around. Some of the guys disliked him enough to punch him in the nose on the way by. But other than that, it was not. It was not too much. It was extremely pleasant to be greeted at the airplane by all the crew and the people like that. It was obvious that they were as glad. It seemed that they were as glad to see us as we were to see them, if that's possible.
Okay, you mentioned the crew on the airplane. Why don't we get to the flight back to Clark?
Well, we were very in a state of quite excited, and we were quite pleased at all of the things they had for us. General Strong was on our plane. He made a point of speaking to everyone. I think he's a very fine man. They seemed to be, I think the thing that has impressed all of us during this whole thing was the high state of preparation that there was. This has been probably the smoothest operation, particularly considering all the ramifications involved in this one, I have ever been involved in. I think that was one of my biggest overall impressions. Everything has gone so very well. It seemed that they were prepared for everything that we could want in much larger quantities than we could handle.
Yeah, I can understand that. There were several points on the flights that my guys have mentioned that were high points. Big cheer went up when the wheels lifted off the ground. Another one at sometimes when they passed the 20th parallel.
I think ours was feet wet when we left that godforsaken flight. When they said, when the co-pilot announced feet wet, which meant we were no longer over North Vietnamese territory. I think that was, we started feeling much more secure than that at that point. I think that was a very big point.
What about the things that transpired after the landing, after you touched down?
Well,
what were your thoughts when you first walked through that door?
Well, I was again the first one off after Colonel Flynn, as you probably know, and I was standing at the doorway, and I was extremely surprised to see all those people out there, and those signs and banners and that kind of thing. I was very surprised. I had heard that Admiral Guyler was going to be there to meet us, but it was a very impressive thing to me that all those people should come out and see us, especially all those children.
R-37F 238, interview with Commander McCain.
Okay. Was your treatment any different because your name is McCain?
I would have to say yes to that question. I think that the Vietnamese were glad to have me. They were, as they were with other people who were of some publicity value to them, and they attempted a number of times to exploit the fact that my father was who he was and the position that he was in. A number of times they were very strong in their tactics, trying to get me to possibly embarrass my father and our country. They had some rather strange ideas as to exactly the position that my father held. You'd think, according to them, that he was the president rather than the job that he held. But my treatment was, I did understand that I was valuable to them, and I wasn't, I was pretty sure that they weren't going to let me die, which some other men did not have the assurance of. But they wanted very much, particularly when the treatment improved late in 1969, that I would meet people that came to the DRV, which I was able to resist in the main.
You mentioned that the improvement, an improvement occurred in 1969. How drastic
Yes, it
was?
Did. It was night and day. It was like a difference between night and day. It was obvious that great outward pressures had been exerted upon them to start treating us at least in a much better manner. And although their treatment never measured up to the standards anywhere resembling that of the Geneva Agreements, it did improve considerably in that many of their rougher tactics were done away with and did not appear again. One of the things which gradually disappeared was the solitary confinement aspect of it. The food improved drastically. We were let outside of our rooms for periods of time for the first time. There were many things, and it was obvious from their behavior at our level that pressures had been brought from above, from their governing people, that we should not be harmed or beaten or some of the other things which they had pulled on us before. I think one of the best things that happened to us was the food improvement. The food, particularly in the summertime, was very bad up to that time. And then they made an effort to improve it quite a bit. Also, the fact that we started receiving packages from our families was an important thing, because primarily, although many of us did not receive many of them, I, for one, although I shared with my friends their packages, vitamin pills were very important. It seemed that the vitamins did away with a lot of the chronic problems that we seem to have, like boils and dysentery, things like that. Just the fact that we were able to obtain vitamins was very good. But in general, the Vietnamese were intent on trying, at least to the degree of which they are able to. And what I mean by able to is I believe that it's unable for a communist to treat a prisoner like a prisoner of war. It's not within his mental or physical ability to do so, but at least a North Vietnamese communist. But however, within their scope, and I think that they actually felt that they were treating us well, even though they were not.
You mentioned that pressure was brought to bear and that caused your condition to improve. Where do you put the credit for that pressure?
President Richard M. Nixon is the man that I give the credit to. I heard that he made a speech at the United Nations. I heard that he marshaled the public opinion and encouraged the people in the United States to help us, and I think they responded, but without his motivating force, I don't believe that it would have obtained the success that it did. I think that he recognized from the men who they had released in late 1969 the problems that we were faced with, and he decided that he was going to do everything he could to help us out. And I think that my opinion is shared by almost every one of us. We're great fans of his now, you know.
Okay, thank you very much.
Certainly.
Let's cut it right there. Camera.
R37F 238. Interview with Commander Clow, Part 1.
Okay, Commander Clower, I wonder if you could describe to me some of the events that transpired just prior to your release and give me an idea of some of the things that you were thinking about during that time.
I think the main thing all of that day, we had been told, the day that we were released, we had been told that morning that we would, the day before, that we would be released that day. And I think we were all up awful early, some of them not even sleeping the night before because of the excitement. And when the buses came in, the V buses came in the following morning, they sat around, and we were told that we were waiting on the four-party group to come around. And when all of the photographers and everything else started rolling in, I think the excitement, everybody wanted to know what was going on. But it had been our policy not to give the V any more propaganda than we could. And in turn, we were trying not to be rude to the photographers and to the reporters, but to stay away from them. And so they did pull four of us over to see the four-party group. Would you like a short
Yeah,
description?
why don't you just
Okay.
run into
When
the-
I walked into the room, as we pulled us out, they pulled four of us, and I was the senior one. They told us to put on our present V clothes, those clothes which we normally wore, not the clothes which we wore into Vietnam, in here in Clark. They told me to go one direction, and I went to speak to the Colonel Flynn, and he told me to go see them, to stay away from cameramen and reporters, and not to tell them, to inform them that any questions that would be answered by Colonel Flynn. I told the guards I would not go out in the yard if there were cameramen there. They removed all the cameramen at that time, and we walked into a room, a long table, sitting there with Americans, 3 Americans on one side, some Indonesians, some Polish officers, and some North Vietnam officers. The four-party joint, the Canadians were there too. And as we came in, the 3 Americans stood at attention, 2 majors, 2 Army majors, and an Army enlisted man. They stood at attention. We walked in. We were offered seats. We sat, and when we sat, the Army 3 sat down, and then Major Ellington, I think, and I may be pronouncing that wrong, stood up and spoke for the crowd. He introduced himself. He was out of MacV, out of Saigon. He introduced a Major Johnson and an enlisted translator. He told me that they were there to inspect the camp as the protocol called for. They were to inspect the last camp of detention. He told me they would pick up 107 American military and 1 civilian. I informed him at that time that I was a senior man there. We would leave immediately if any cameras came in the room. I also informed him that I would answer no questions, that Colonel Flynn was a senior man in the camp, and that he would answer all questions. He turned to his interpreter and said something to him. His interpreter turned to the V and said something in Vietnamese, and at that point he turned and told me, "We have asked to speak to Colonel Flynn and the camp commander." We sat around a while, everybody being real stern-faced, and all at once I kind of look around and I kind of catch Major Johnson out of my eyes, and he's looked at me, I looked at him, and he kind of looks around right quick, gives me a big wink, and kind of smiled and straightened back up. And it was pretty nice to know that at least you had an American there looking at you. I looked across the table, and the Indonesian did the same thing, which made me feel a little better. At this time, an NBC photographer came by with a movie camera, held up a...
Cut. R37F 239, interview with Commander Clower, Part 2. Okay. Commander Clower, you want to pick up the story where
Okay.
we finished off there?
Well, Major Johnson winked at me to turn around, and I was able to smile back a little bit, and then everybody went pretty straight again after the Indonesian looked at us, smiled too, and then the room became very tense again, very formal. At this time, an NBC photographer came in with a movie camera, held up a sign, said news, and pointed to me and pointed to the sign. I looked at him, gave him a thumbs down. He nodded to me and dropped the camera. I appreciated this. At this time, I did not want problems with an American. I was having enough problems with V, and I did not want this. And I thought the NBC photographer was extremely nice. I did not get his name. I saw him again at the airport, full beard type, and was very nice about it. He left the room. In a few minutes, the Bushy, as we called him, the camp commander, a crew-cut, heavy-set individual with a little black mark under his eye, who had been camp commander at nearly every camp I had been in, came in. So we knew each other very well. I heard him use my V name once or twice. I don't speak Vietnamese, but I understand a word or so after you've been in it 5 or 6 years, not many. And then his interpreter told the Americans that we were all went through their normal routine. We're all no rank. Everyone is equal. There is no seniors. And we were all the same. The major then, I thought, did an outstanding job. I was impressed with him. I thought that his work was extremely nice. And at that point he says, can I assume from this that you are refusing me commission to see Colonel Flynn? They went through their routine again. The major says, if you do not let me see Colonel Flynn, I am assuming you are refusing me permission to see Colonel Flynn. At this point, Bushy stood up and says something in V. His interpreter says to me, you may turn to your room of detention. I did not understand him very well, but at that point I did understand something that was being done, and that was the guards pulling on my clothes and trying to get me out of the room by pulling on me. So I turned and asked what he said, and the American interpreter said, he says, you may return to your room of detention. You may, but they're pulling me nearly out of the room at this point, and so I got up and left the room. As a couple of cameramen tried to come at me, and I gave them thumbs down, finally covered my hand over my face and walked out. The other three gentlemen with me, Major, I'm using old ranks at this time. Mm-hmm. The ranks that we used in the DRV, Major Bob Barnett and Captain Guy Gruder and Lieutenant Howard Hill, all of us walked out. They never spoke during this. By the way, I informed them in the middle of this when the major said, you are refusing, let me speak. I did inform them at this time that Colonel Flynn would like to speak to them. He looked at me and nodded and said, I understand Colonel Flynn would like to speak to me. Mm-hmm. We went back to our rooms. I stopped and told the colonel what had transpired and then went to my room. It was the first time I'd ever unlocked my own cell and walked into a cell, but normally we would not do this, but I felt it was time to go in my cell, and because the cameramen were out. So I opened the cell door and went in, although I could not lock it behind me. Then basically that was what happened before we got to Guillain.
How would you contrast the environment that you experienced there with your arrival at Clark?
Oh, there's a big difference. The big excitement was seeing the C-141 land. We could see it in the distance as it broke overhead and started its approach. The excitement was pretty high then. Nervousness, tension, anxiety to see it. When the bus pulled up to walk up and see the Americans, to salute the Brigadier General that was to salute us. I don't remember his name right now. I wished I did. But I was to be able to him to say, we're glad to see you, glad to have you, and to shake his hand. To walk across that ramp from that place where he did to that captain, whoever he was. They all was just something that you could not express. You haven't seen an American, a free one. You haven't touched him or anything else. Everything is in the distance. You're always worrying about that dream that we've had so many times, that all of us have had, that we're free, but we got to come back. I have not talked to a man or been with a man who had never dreamed in the DRV that he was free. All of us have dreamed of being free. And yet, in every one of those dreams, we knew we had to go back. Our psychological minds would never let us completely be free, even in our dreams. And so when you dreamed that you were home, or you dreamed you were somewhere, there was always that something in the back of your mind which said, I got to go back tomorrow. I got to go back. And you were always getting ready to go back. And you wondered whether or not this was that dream too. I never dreamed much till I went to DRV, but for some reason or other I did up there. And walking out to see that nurse and to see an American face, I always said that the first American woman that I saw, American lady that I saw, I was going to hug her. And all I could do was just look at her. She was, so I didn't hug her. I had to wait till I get on the plane, and then I thought, I didn't hug her. So my wife may hear that too, that I didn't hug her, but I didn't. But I did as soon as I got on the plane.
Okay. what kind of reaction did you have when you stepped through the door off that 141 with the crowd here at Clark and the...
I only saw one person in that crowd that I knew, but I was impressed with everyone else. I looked at him and he was a naval officer and I expected him where he was, standing at attention. It'd been a good many years since I'd seen him, but I recognized him. But the children, the hollering, the screaming, the signs, was something that you just can't forget. They were Americans. The V had told us for so long that the American public wasn't behind us. They weren't good Americans. They didn't like things. But yet, they were out there hollering, "God bless America." You could tell that there were the Americans that fought in every war since time began, since we've been a country. And it made you proud again to be an American. Proud and maybe that we did something there. And maybe we'll be able to do something else. That it wasn't all in vain. There were Americans, and there were Americans behind us. And that people like the V will never last and never endure with theirs because they rule with fear, and that's the only thing they know. They only know force, and they only know fear. And if they can't rule with that, they don't rule. We don't act like that. Those Americans are free, and they're there because they're free men. Those children were hollering and screaming because they wanted to, not because someone was forced them to or someone drove them up there to make them do it. And that's enough to make you proud. In those 5 or 6 years that we spent up there, or 7 or whatever they may be, were worth that. And maybe those children won't have to go fight. I hope so. But if they do, let's go again and let people like me go that are a little older, and maybe they won't have to do it.
That's a pretty incredible philosophy, Commander. You leave me a little bit dumbfounded. From here, let's go to the hospital a little bit. How has your care been here, and what's your reaction to the treatment and the environment here in the hospital?
You can't explain that. I'll pick out an individual because I have seen him. There is a Sergeant Bennett downstairs that's feeding us. He's working in the cafeteria. I've been here now over 2 days, 2.5 days. I have never walked past that door, and the first night I did not sleep, that he hasn't been there. I have talked to a bunch of other Americans, and they say too, he's been there ever since we've been there. If you walk in there and you look like you want something, glass of milk, or your plate runs empty, anything, he's handing you something else. How he's getting around to 108 of us, I don't know, but he's touching every man on the shoulder and giving him something to drink. I used him because I know his name, but he's not the only one. The nurses on the wards, the corpsmen, the lab technicians, everybody looks like they're just going out of their way. I have never had or seen such service. Colonel Lloyd should be proud as any man of having people like this with him. I can't express my feelings and my thanks for the people here in the hospital. They have been great. My escort officer, he's done everything for me. You know, if you turn around and look like you're going to reach for something, well, let me do that. I think that Lieutenant Dave Hought has done a tremendous job, and I could not thank him enough.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that you took a trip to one of the schools today. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, I was asked to go to one of the grade schools, and Wordsmith, I got it backwards, Wordsmith Elementary School. And they gave us a guide, and I hit first grades. I think I hit 3 groups of first graders. And it was something that can touch you. I nearly had tears in my eyes. I cried when I talked to my wife, and you know, it's kind of shameful, a man sitting here at 6 foot tall to say,